This week's show brought to you by exclusive raid passes, which are crap, and we will talk about even though they have nothing to do with basketball. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats. Dang it, I'm going to think of a fourth nickname for you, Brian, or if someone puts a good one in the comments or on Twitter, let me know. Because, I just basically want this entire show to be one long intro and then go, and we're out. But anyway, Happy New Year. Welcome back to the Boxscore Geeks show. Candidly, this is going to sound offensive to ourselves, Brian, but I'll put it out there. This is kind of a preseason show, a warm-up show. We've kind of been out of the loop because holiday weekends, now I have Thanksgiving and my son's birthday are now pretty much going to be on the same week most years, so that knocks me out. I traveled for Christmas, so we only did a show like once every 2 weeks from like third week of November on, and so this week was like, let's just get back on the air, let's get back into it. Some weeks were more heavily scripted. I was in Minneapolis until like 6 p.m. on Sunday, so not as much this week, but there's tons. We've always brought this point up. There's tons to talk about in the NBA, always, especially when the regular season's going. So we're going to talk about some of it, and if it feels a little rougher, let us know. And then I've got tangents galore. I teased it, so I might as well bring it up, and I actually want to look into this. I am an avid Pokemon Go player. I really enjoy that. It's kind of weird, Brian. It's like a stay-at-home, work-from-home dadish activity. There are actually several people that do that out here that, during the day, during lunch breaks, whatever, do that. So I get to enjoy that because I do work from home, and it lets me get out of the house. And the complaint is there's something known as an exclusive raid pass, which is required to get Mewtwo. And this was in beta like 5 months ago, and everybody hated it in beta. And then it went live, and no one knows how it works. And it's just incredibly frustrating because even the best players in the game, there's a guy, I believe in the Philippines, that has 300 million experience, which for reference, 20 million is like the top level. So he has 300 million experience, I believe. And has over 3,000 raids. So you need to do a raid to get an exclusive raid. The upper cap on raids is 1,000. So again, let 3,000 be a thing. And he doesn't have an exclusive raid pass. There's a funky algorithm that no one knows how it works, and it's just getting progressively more and more frustrating. One curiosity I have with this is Apple apparently claimed that loot box items, you'll probably know more about this than me, Brian, but we're on Twitch, so we're talking gaming, so that's good.
Loot boxes are a big topic.
So loot boxes, it's essentially a form of gambling, which is fine. I want to get this tangent on a tangent out of the way. There's this weird Puritan idealism in the United States culture against gambling. I remember when DFS was getting slammed for having so many commercials back in the day. I believe it was a Colbert or a Conan O'Brien sketch that was just like, oh, this is just gambling. I don't care. Gambling is a huge part of the United States cultures. We like sports, and let's just be 100% candid. The sports market that has grown by leaps and bounds in the last 30, 40 years, the NBA in particular, not possible without gambling. College sports, which who knows, we may or may not end up talking about, Brian. Bullshit if they think that they have the big contracts that they get for schools, the multi-million-dollar coaching deals, the fantastic facilities. I actually, tangent on a tangent, Brian. I got to visit my old alma mater. I went by CSU when I drove through Fort Collins in Colorado. Like I mentioned, I traveled there, and they have a
Rams.
Atrocity of a stadium now that is basically right in what would have been the parking lot behind my dorm. And I heard some people mention that people, even if you have a parking pass on campus, they basically say on game days you're required to take your car off campus. Like you can't park even if you have a parking pass at the school on game day because it's such a big deal to get people coming in. Even though I don't think CSU is a fantastic school at football, although who knows, maybe it is. It's still a big deal up there. So I would be infuriated as a student nowadays if I spent, however much it costs for a parking pass on campus only to be told you have to get your car off campus for a unrelated sporting event to school. So yeah. Anyway, so gambling is just a thing in the United States culture. I hate the kind of false outrage that we have about it. Oh my God. That being said, loot boxes are just a thing in games where you get a random rare drop item and Apple's saying, hey, that's fine, but you have to disclose the odds. I'd actually be really curious. And if anybody knows, and I'm probably going to try and look into this, like Google, or not Google, Pokemon Go really should tell you the odds because no one knows how the hell it's working. It's just getting infuriating. For more avid players, myself included, are like, yo, I play daily. Why don't I have a Mewtwo yet? It's kind of getting frustrating.
You know, one thing I heard about that recently, Dre, not to go too deep into it, but in the past, people have looked to the Chinese gaming communities to figure that kind of stuff out because it is actually required in China. So if there's any game that has an international release, then they'll release the odds in China. They probably aren't different in other countries. So it's kind of interesting.
It's a weird one because the situation that this works is I'm sure those of you that don't play Pokemon Go, and by the way, if you use the freaking line, people still play Pokemon Go, it's just going to drive me batty. It's still one of the biggest games. There's still lots of people that play.
It's a cash cow.
It's what annoys me about that kind of mentality is it's very egocentric, which a lot of people have. And this happened, like we even say this to sports fans. Like when you say, I can't believe someone is into that, and I'm gonna tangent on a tangent on a tangent on a tangent, Brian and tease. We'll probably be having a Star Wars episode when all the stars align. I really want a sequel. So a few years ago, myself, Patrick, and EJ Fisher all talked Star Wars, which came about because I just randomly mentioned it on the show, and EJ got into the comments, and I was like, I've got to have a Tiptree Award-winning author to talk about Star Wars. He knows his stuff, and then, of course, Patrick, too. So we're going to do that, but we have to make sure all of us are available, and, of course, travel schedules, whatever. So that's still going to happen, hopefully in the very near future. Keep on us. It will. But something about Star Wars is interesting is, of course, there's been a lot of blowback from the media. There have been people that hate it, people that love it, et cetera, and we will definitely talk more about that. But what was fascinating to me is if you look at it, with 2 weeks to go in the year, that's about when it was released, it is the #1 grossing movie of 2017. There is a fantastic site that I've mentioned before, probably inspired my name, the-numbers.com, that does movie grosses, movie news, et cetera. And I used to be I've always been kind of a weird stats guy, and it just kind of varied. It used to be movie grosses. I've done hockey. The hockey lockout killed my love of hockey because it destroyed the Colorado Avalanche, but luckily the Denver Nuggets took off right around the same time, so I became a Nuggets fan and basketball fan, and then now basketball analytics. But the-numbers.com, you can go there, and it has, not only does it have charts of like releases, a fantastic set to look at, Brian, just to make sure this is still there. If you go to the-numbers.com, and Star Wars, it did get kicked off by Jumanji in its third week, but to be fair, modern movies lasting more than 2 weeks at #1 is rare. It's actually, there's a really fantastic Seth Godin talk about how novelty is what drives things. So like there's always a new #1 movie. It's one of the weirdest things about Titanic. That streak of #1 weekends for Titanic will probably never be matched. It's very similar to like Wilt Chamberlain-ish stats. Just the market has changed so much that's probably never going to happen. But they will do not only grosses. So if you go to just thenumbers.com and click on Star Wars Episode 7 or 8, you can see it pretty easily. They have like a little heat chart that shows how its gross is doing, and then they have like this shaded area around like where you would expect it to go. Meaning this is kind of its min and its max for what you would expect per movie. And if you look at Star Wars, it's basically in the middle of its shaded chart. There's nothing surprising about it, meaning it's basically based on its opening day, which was huge. It's basically performed at about expectations. For comparison, by the way, you can click on Wonder Woman or search for Wonder Woman, Brian. So I'm sending you a new site. I know you know how to use Boxscore Geeks like the back of your hand. I'm like, let's go to another site. Wonder Woman vastly like performed at the very, very peak of what you'd expect. You can find that. There's a search bar on the side. And then finally, Justice League, if you click on that, which is just kind of funny, if you look at Justice League's box office, I don't think I've ever seen this on a movie. It dipped outside of its shaded area. Now, one thing I'll say about Justice League as a defense is that IP is just so valuable. Despite the fact that Justice League vastly underperformed expectations, it is still worth over $500 million worldwide. Somebody can use that. So Justice League, DC movies aren't going anywhere. It's just kind of depressing. But, you know, just kind of getting back to the egocentric point, just because you didn't like a movie doesn't mean it's not a successful movie. This one that really burned me on this, that kind of stung to a degree, I never went and saw it, was Suicide Squad. A bunch of people really, really when they talk about the failure of the DC movies with Warner Brothers, they lump Suicide Squad into it because they'll say, Batman is horrible and Superman is horrible and what is Zack Snyder doing and yada, yada, yada. Although actually, I was wrong, Brian. I didn't realize this either. Suicide Squad basically did the exact same thing Justice League did. It started really hot and then went way under what you would have expected. So it actually did better than they expected, but based on its initial hype, did not live up to it. So, sorry, I don't know what the heck I was talking about there, Brian, but just basically things aren't necessarily for you. Other people can like things. And just because you don't like or enjoy it doesn't mean it's not popular. And it's just like, that's actually...
So that was about Pokemon Go's popularity, but directly before that, you're talking about loot boxes and gambling.
Yeah. And so, okay, wow, way to get me back on track. But yeah, to finish that topic off, just the point being, it's a very infantile, and I say that literally because there's like stages of learning where this is actually a milestone of development. When you are a child and you realize, hey, if something disappears and I don't see it anymore, that doesn't mean it disappeared. It still exists, right? That is actually a stage of development. So it's funny to see.
Talk about object permanence.
Hey, boom, you are on the ball today, bro. Despite the fact that I am way off grid. I'm Kobe chucking from half court at this point.
Oh, basketball. We could talk about that.
We could talk about. Okay, so anyway, loot boxes, it would, finishing that up. Just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's not popular. The Pokemon Go comment, that was cute, but you're wrong. It's the most popular mobile game, and people, including this show host, like it, as the 10-minute detraction will show. Loot boxes, possibly a form of gambling. It would be very interesting to see if Pokemon Go has to adhere to that, although it's not exactly the same. Basketball, Brian, let's talk about weird expectations, which might align with what you would expect from the show. Based on a weekly basis, you probably would expect some detractions like we just had, but you usually probably expect to get to basketball sooner. And two teams that I love that you brought up were the Warriors and the Rockets. So since we've been gone, the Rockets, who were the best thing since sliced bread, gonna tear up the Warriors, they've kind of gone cold. And the Warriors, who are probably the greatest dynasty constructed team with the modern rules, just for clarification on that, for my point, the modern NBA basically says you get superstar players to guaranteed contracts for 5 years. That's either rookie players or extensions. Most contracts are about 4 years. We just know from the stats, even with modern health, et cetera, modern players only last on average about 6 seasons. So when I'm talking about a dynasty team, the fact that this Warriors team will probably have regular season wise, it already has like the best 3-year span, right, Brian? I'm not getting that mistaken.
Yeah, that's true.
And then probably if we look at, 6-7 years ish, right? Kind of the LeBron James and Miami Heat expected output, which didn't happen, not 6, not 7, not 8, whatever. Golden State's probably going to be one of the greatest modern dynasties. And anybody who brings up an older dynasty will just have to point out that the rules regarding free agency, regarding contact link, regarding salary cap rules, regarding like cap hits.
And just the size of the league. There's only 8 teams during the Celtics dynasty.
Well, yeah, like the Celtics back in it just doesn't count. I'm sorry. If you, and I've gotten into this argument before, if you think Bill Russell's Celtics, if you want to look at them as an impressive part of NBA history, that's fine. And there is lots of interesting hypotheticals about what the top of that team, I'm talking Bill Russell, what Havlicek, there's probably a couple others. Celtics fans are probably getting mad that I don't remember all their stars.
Oh, Bob Cousy. He's still around.
how those people could bear with modern training from start to finish, that's fine. The idea that the Celtics teams from the 60s could come even close to modern NBA teams is laughable. And even when we start going back to Michael Jordan's era, same exact problems happen where like you start looking at the ends of a lot of popular and good teams and just the benchmark for even a bench player has gone up dramatically. So anyway, like the Golden State Warriors are probably going to be one of the best franchises ever, dynasty teams ever. And if people start saying, well, it needs to last 10 years, I'm going to say, well, that doesn't really apply anymore. From like 2000 on, a dynasty squad with the same set of players, I'm talking like Shaq and Kobe, doesn't really exist. Even when you look at like San Antonio Spurs, they retooled multiple times, right? It was David Robinson and Tim Duncan initially. Then it was Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili next. And then it was Tim Duncan and Kawhi. next. Now, Tim Duncan, by the way, freaking crazy, probably greatest power forward in the history of, when you factor in regular season and playoff play, probably, and longevity, probably the greatest power forward in NBA history.
Of course, Ginobili's still around now, but you're talking like who are the two dominant players on that team, right?
Definitely. That's what I'm saying. Is I'm saying like if you tried to look at successful teams and you look at like their best two players, even teams that had multiple finals runs in them, I'm talking, things like even the Bulls, right? That was Jordan, Grant, Pippen. They kind of traded off there. Then it was Jordan, Pippen, Rodman. They traded off there. As I mentioned with the Lakers, it was Shaq and Kobe. Then it was not Shaq. Shaq and Powell would have been amazing. Kobe and Powell.
Lamar Odom was in there for a little while.
Yeah, Chris Ye would be really mad. He loves
Lamar Odom.
Loves, rightfully so, Lamar Odom, a player that will never get Hall of Fame recognition, but definitely deserves it. So Warriors, though, nothing really to worry about, and they're doing fine. Steph Curry was out, which was kind of cause for concern, but the rough thing about that squad is, barring Nick Young, I think, and even then, maybe not. I want to check back in, because sometimes we see a player perform well in the first couple of weeks, and then we check back in, and they've regressed. A player I'm really curious on, Brian, because he's doing this 2 years in a row now. Oh, good. Nick Young did regress. Thank goodness. So Nick Young is a bad player.
He's still been good for Nick Young, though. He hasn't been a horrible anchor.
That's what I'm going to stress about this team is the Warriors, barring Nick Young and Sean Livingston. And Sean Livingston, let's give him some credit, is just old and beat up. Sean Livingston, by the way, very Grant Hillish that I like, right? Didn't he have a horrific injury when he was younger? He was a super talented
He had one of the most graphic injuries in sports. It was up there. It was brutal to watch.
I've never brought myself to watch it. I mean, if you look at his age curve on the Clippers, he was on the up and up. He was an above average player with the Clippers, played 1,600 minutes, and then huge injury. And just, the fact that he came back and with Cleveland and Brooklyn and Golden State has been an above average role player is awesome. But he's just been, age, right? He's on the downhill trend. Last season, he was a little below average, which isn't a bad thing for a bench player on the Warriors. And this season, he's just not a good player. But we brought this up. That's not really going to matter probably in the playoffs, because if you look at the top minute getters, I'm trying to sort at boxscoregeeks.com/teams. GSW is Golden State, 2017. Funny convention I'll give you there is Yahoo Sports. I've mentioned them before, was a lot of our initial feed, and we want to update that in the future, but we'll see if that ever happens. They do by first year, like year that the season started in, and then most things like Basketball Reference, NBA will do this year it ends in. So anyway, that's why we're 2017 there. We look at the top minutes getters: Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala, Steph Curry, Omri Caspi, and Patrick McCaw. All of those players average or above average. Klay Thompson a little below. What I'll actually give him in credit, I've said this before, is he's a fantastic scorer, and his usage, his shots per game would be higher on most teams. He's got a 60.1% true shooting, which is great. He's got a 45% from three, and he takes 10.7 3-point attempts per 48. On most other teams, I'd say shoot more. He's on one of the few teams. Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, 65.8% out of Steph Curry. Have we reminded you he's a two-time and also unanimous MVP getter? And Omri Caspi, good heavens.
Only 68% true shooting?
Only 68. Someone tweeted this out. He's playing the best he can on the Golden State Warriors. He's been one of these players, because we always have to talk position adjustment, right? He's one of these players that was getting played out of position on Sacramento. They were playing him as a big, and I know there was some dislike of that, because basically the fact that he is classified as a big means he looks worse by our numbers. But then if you actually if you were like, well, if he played as a small, with what he can do, perimeter shooting, he'd probably be above average. No disagreement there. So basically he was played incorrectly by other teams. And then the Warriors are like, hey, what if we just need another shooter? And someone was like, this is the only team that doesn't need that. And then I joked in response, I think you like this, Brian. I was like, at this point, all the Warriors are doing is they're just taking good pieces off the board. I know this is like a bridge. Is it bridge? Maybe Hearts. Stu Unger, one of the best.
He was a poker player, yeah.
He was fantastic. I believe it was Hearts. I think he was super or another game.
There's a lot of players that good at multiple games. Like, so one of the guys who made
No.
the World Series final table several times in the early 2000s during that like poker boom era was Dan Harrington. He was also a champion backgammon player. And of course, we've talked a lot about the poker and Magic the Gathering crossover with guys like Dave Williams and John Finkel. So yeah, if you're good at games, you're probably good at multiple games.
Yeah, and it was Gin Rummy, by the way. And so Gin Rummy, it's a card game, and part of the way that game actually works, because you're supposed to like put, pairs or straights or something together. Part of the strategy of that game is if I can identify what you are trying to do, you're trying to get 4 4s or whatever, I can grab a 4 even if I don't need it to just prevent you, to stall you out. And like that was a huge part of Gin Rummy, is knowing what your opponent's getting, knowing what you need. And he's probably, based on some of the readings, I'm not an expert at this. It's just based on a few autobiographies of Stu Unger I've read. He was probably the best Gin Rummy player ever. And it was just, he was too good that they kept kicking him out of tournaments. And that's why I went to poker.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, there's even really old games. Like chess is thousands of years old. People are still doing new stuff. I can't remember which country it is. I want to say it was an African country. They all of a sudden rose up in Scrabble by using a defensive strategy instead of trying to go for the bingos, limiting everyone else. So yeah, all kinds of new stuff happens in games. It's really incredible.
Because on Scrabble, right, you've got a board and there are rewards for like triple word score and whatever. I could see, yeah, that's fascinating, where I could see in Scrabble, I'm not sure, I'm spitballing off the top of my head, and this is your point, not mine, but like I could see like if you just put a word that like went across to prevent someone from being able to go down and get like a triple word score or something.
Yeah, and stuff like doing smaller words so the board doesn't get bigger. And yeah, I don't know anything about Scrabble, obviously, by the way I'm talking here, but this is something I read last year. So,
all right, well, we've thrown in like 6 games that aren't basketball. I'm loving this podcast, Brian.
Yeah, and just one point on Caspi. He actually is playing like a big man this year. He's rebounding and blocking shots, so it's kind of amazing. David West is also blocking a lot of shots. He's kind of a 6'8" power forward, not a huge guy like some of the bigger shot blockers. There is a movement for Kevin Durant to be the defensive player of the year. He's blocking a lot of shots. I think that's mostly because Draymond Green said he thought that was true. Although Arturo posted a chart showing, Capella and Drummond's dominance lately. So I question that. But yeah, the point stands. There is something magical about the Warriors that are getting these good players to play even better. And I'm suspicious of stuff like that too, coaching and chemistry narratives. But it might be more about, I think, your point of teams using players wrong and the Warriors just know how to use players right.
Oh, here's where I'm at, and I want to temper the point. So I'm going to say a point, and then I'll give some caveats. Proper economist thinking. Our opinion in terms of well-run, at least in NBA and probably other sports too, well-run front offices is we don't think they're anywhere close to peak efficiency. Even the front offices we like, this is San Antonio, this is Golden State, we still think they make fundamental mistakes. And as a result of that, it means you don't need to be perfect as a front office to compete. And additionally, the talent gap, in my opinion, in front offices is so vast that even these that's what makes making fun of or complaining about Houston kind of amusing.
You mean the talent of the personnel on the staff, not the players?
Of the front office, well, both, right? So we complain about Houston because of mistakes we think they make. Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson, for instance, both way overpaid. Goodness sakes, no need to have done that. That being said, they are still significantly better than the worst teams in the NBA. And so, like, in terms of the Warriors, what makes them fascinating is just like the skill gap. When you talk about lucking into a star, which is required to win in the NBA, and I do stress the word luck. Luck can be a lot of things. Luck can be a draft pick you are high on actually panning out, because for every surefire Tim Duncan-ish player, there are still plenty of players that just looked amazing in college and did not pan out. Ralph Sampson, despite being in the NBA Hall of Fame, a topic I might have for another day, by the way, Ralph Sampson never turned into a star, in our view, NBA player. That just never happened. Didn't pan out. Whereas like Hakeem Olajuwon, the other star center on that Rockets squad, turned into one of the best ever. It's hard to know.
And so did Clyde Drexler, for that matter. Like, two of those three guys became all-time great NBA players, and the other is just like, eh.
Clyde Drexler not selected in the draft lottery. So fun times for that. But just noting that it takes lucking into a star, and luck can mean lots of things. It can mean they come available on the free market. Kevin Durant and LeBron James are both fascinating studies where if you had told, what's funny is despite the fact that you could tell both of them they were going to be a finals MVP player within 2 seasons, both of those players with the backlash they got for their decision, it's possible if you told them ahead of time, they might not have made that move, who knows? And who knows if they're just, blowing
Durant,
smoke.
I think, actually said that in public.
I was going to say both players might be blowing smoke too, where they both kind of expressed post regret after it. So, but who knows, right? So the point being, it can be the right name coming on the market at the right time, lucking into the right draft pick, lucking into a trade that shouldn't be on the board but is, Kevin Durant, for instance. So to win in the NBA does require lucking into a star player. That's just known, and it's possible someday coaching overcomes that. But the closest that we've ever seen a team without a star for the full regular season was the 1990, and that overcame better teams, was the 1999 New York Knicks. And I think there was a lot going there because it was a shortened season. I think some of their older players didn't get as beat up as they would in a normal season. Marcus Camby peaked at the right time. So it's kind of that. And that's
he became a star later. He just wasn't in the past.
He became a star in that playoffs. But yeah, so I'm saying like that's the point, is that this idea that being a better run team is enough to trump talent isn't true in the NBA if talent's on even a reasonably well run team. So there's still that point, but the Warriors, for instance, just to give them credit, they do seem to be a better run team than the other. And it's funny because it seems at this point they're kind of just playing defensive, which is fine, right? They're picking players that other teams are misusing, and I think that's fascinating in many ways, and not doesn't even matter one way or the other. And then I just made a joke on Twitter today where I said, the draft lottery is supposed to help bad teams compete with good teams. Maybe they need a draft lottery for front offices, because candidly in the NBA, there is just not overcoming bad run teams versus good run teams. Even when bad run teams luck into a star player, like, the Wolves, I am really fascinated to see how long Karl Anthony Towns stays there. Jimmy Butler helps a lot, but if Andrew Wiggins keeps doing what he's doing and the Wolves get knocked out in early rounds in the playoffs, if I'm Karl Anthony Towns, I might take a 3-year deal, and I don't even know if he's signed an extension yet. I'll look that up real quick. But who knows if Karl Anthony Towns just eventually is like, I'm not sticking around, and that's already happened twice, right? They had Kevin Durant, not Kevin Durant, got the wrong of all the Kevins to guess. There's like 2/3 chance I was going to get it right, of Kevin Garnett and Kevin Love. There's a
lot of good Kevins.
Yeah, a lot of good Kevins. If you're a good Kevin,
that's my new draft strategy. Just draft Kevins.
If they are a good-looking Kevin in college, draft them immediately. But yeah, so he hasn't signed a new contract to my understanding. Who knows if he just signs like a 3-year extension with them and wants to go elsewhere, because we've seen that happen before. So, just bad run front office can't compete with good. But getting back to the very, very, very original point, you noted that at the beginning of the season, the Warriors were probably underperforming like their SRS, and they had a bad run. The Rockets were probably overperforming their SRS, and then of course have had injuries, and they're both kind of regressing. And then one point you made was that instead of people taking the calm stance of, these teams weren't comparing to their expectation earlier based on their SRS, based on their numbers, whatever. And then of course to the point of the Rockets, there are some injuries. People are kind of overreacting and responding to narrative, which is something we always say happens in sports.
Yeah, it's funny. So we were talking about this before the show. So 2 weeks ago, last time we did a show, the Rockets were surging. They were on this winning streak. The Warriors were down a little bit, and I think Steph Curry had just gotten hurt, or no, he was already hurt, but he wasn't back yet. Anyway, the point is, the Rockets had like 2 losses to end that winning streak, and it was just clear that they were going to be the number 1 seed, in the playoffs, and the Warriors were going to have to fight them, and it was going to be a dogfight.
Pat themselves on the back for that take too. The article I wrote right before that was, despite the fact that the Rockets are one of the best teams in the NBA, as of the writing of that article, they had a very glaring weakness in Eric Gordon. And as you've noted, the injuries to Chris Paul and now James Harden, Eric Gordon is getting more time, and that does not look to be a good thing.
Right, right, and all that happened 2 weeks ago is flipped now, right? The Warriors are now ahead of them in the standings, and they've had some injuries. And Curry, who was hurt, is now back and healthy, and he had a 10 of 13 three-point shooting performance in his game back. And someone's like, "Oh yeah, this Steph Curry guy can actually play basketball." So one funny thing I noticed is that so the Rockets were ahead of the Warriors in SRS, but kind of back then, but kind of not as far ahead as people were giving them credit for, so we gave some crap for that. Well, so the Warriors have pulled ahead of the Rockets after their big losing streak now. And one funny thing I noticed is both teams are now exactly at their Pythagorean expected wins and losses. So what do I mean by that? Golden State is number 1 in SRS. That is simple rating system on Basketball Reference. It's just strength of schedule, adjusted margin of victory. That's the single biggest indicator of how good a team is playing for that season, right? So the Warriors are now 9.45. Pretty good, not as good as they were early in the season or last few seasons, but pretty damn good. And they have a 29-8 record, exactly their expected wins and losses based on that SRS. Same with the Rockets now. They are number 2 in SRS at 8.05, and they are 26-9, the same record as their expected wins and losses. So things have a way of averaging out. The Rockets were getting a little lucky. Now they're getting a little unlucky, and vice versa the Warriors. Now, injuries are the biggest factors you pointed out, right? I think one of the most underrated parts of the Rockets' losing streak is that Clint Capella missed 2 games. He has been one of the best centers and players overall in the league this year. Drummond as well, for that matter. We just mentioned both of them, in Arturo's chart. There's an Washington Post article that mentions them too. We might get to later that I was a little annoyed about, but
we'll wait a few seconds.
Yeah, we won't get to that now, but just to finish this up, narratives aside, winning streaks and losing streaks aside, those are going to happen during the year. The Rockets and Warriors are both going to be up and down despite being great teams. Injuries are really what matters, though. Like, the Rockets need Harden and Capella and Paul if they're going to beat the Warriors.
Well, and so there are a few glaring things. So to give Arturo, who's American Numbers on Twitter, definitely follow him if you do not. There's a few things I wanted to talk about that. And so the first one is, as I already mentioned, Eric Gordon. Eric Gordon is very troubling if you are going to talk about a playoff team. A few years ago, the Spurs and the Warriors looked like the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it looked like they were very similar to the Rockets and the Warriors this season. Warriors, man, freaking good team. It looked like a foregone conclusion that those two were going to meet in the playoffs, and that was going to be the real finals because they were that much better than the East. And then, of course, if I recall, that's the season that the Warriors lost to the Cavaliers. But the Spurs got defeated by the Oklahoma City Thunder, and some people noted, and we took out position adjustment. I just looked at adjusted production, so that's raw production on the team, not really caring who plays what position, but just saying how well would the players at the minute allocation that this team played them compare against this team? And it actually turned out that OKC was basically as good as the San Antonio Spurs, because when you factored out that, like, the top heaviness, if you give Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook a couple more minutes, and the fact that the Spurs, a lot of their regular season strength is their deep bench, they were about the same. And so when you talk about, like, playoff rotations, I really hope the vacuum's not picking up in the background. My wife is vacuuming.
No, it sounds okay.
But when you factor in the idea that most teams traditionally shorten up their bench in the playoffs. By the way, Mike D'Antoni is notorious for doing this anyway. But most teams shorten up their bench in the playoffs. If you compare the top of the teams out west to the Rockets don't look as strong, namely because of, like, Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson. And the same is true with Andrew Wiggins on the Wolves. But it gets even worse, actually, something I've heard brought up, because you're talking about Capella. And Capella is fantastic. No disagreements there. He has not exceeded like 36 minutes a game this season. He's not broken that mark. In 34 minutes, he is fantastic, but he doesn't exceed that. So the Rockets actually have it, and I've heard some people mention they think it is a matter of conditioning, because what basically happens is if he can't play more, he doesn't play more. That was really dumb. Sorry, I got briefly distracted because I'm trying to cleverly open up another tab as well.
You weren't wrong. That statement.
I'm not wrong. I'm just saying it's funny when you're like, here is what that means, and then you say it out loud, and you're like, oh, Jesus, that was stupid. But basically, it's possible that Capella doesn't have the conditioning to be able to play 40 minutes a game, which might be required in the playoffs. So as much as I love this Rockets squad, and I do, and here's the thing, like we've talked the star mantra. We just, on this podcast, we've already brought up the Nuggets in that Series 5 where they upset the Seattle Supersonics. We talked the 1999 Knicks who upset lots of people. A star player playing out of their mind can win you a series in the playoffs. But the Rockets, when we're talking conventional playoff rotations, are a little troubling in that they have two glaring weaknesses in Eric Gordon and then possibly Capella's conditioning. And it's possible that they go into the playoffs and they are significantly weaker than the Warriors and possibly even like the Timberwolves and the Spurs if they stay that way.
Yeah, and we actually had a commenter comment about this recently, and can't remember who it was off the top of my head. I'll look it up in a few minutes, but yeah, basically this is what the conversation in the comments was about, a potential Rockets Warriors playoff matchup. And one of the things that got brought up, which I liked, is if the Rockets are even willing to. Oh, go ahead, Dre.
Oh, I actually muted myself and tried to put my mouth right in front of the mic so you wouldn't
okay.
my lips say, honey, I'm podcasting.
Sorry about that. We'll keep going.
Polite, so despite trying to not distract you, I did. But anyway, continue about
That's okay. No, but and just that we're not sure if D'Antoni will get suckered into the Warriors small ball game or not. And by that I mean whether or not Capella has the conditioning to play enough minutes or not. Those minutes should be, in crunch time in close games. And they may not do that. They may, go do a small lineup against the Warriors, and in which case they'll definitely lose because, the Oklahoma City Thunder, when they still had Durant, and then, of course, the Cavaliers, the year they won the final, those are the two playoff series that have really done the best against this Warriors team in the last 3 seasons. And they did it with traditional big lineups, right, with 2 big guys. So, I think if Houston does want to try to beat the Warriors, it should be with Capella, not without him. And regardless of his conditioning, we'll have to see if they're willing to, use him in that role.
Yeah, and who even knows? And by the way, so this is like the trying to go back in time in a conversation where the moment's passed, but, have to because I spent all this time trying to look it up. What's fascinating about, we're talking about like not overreacting. The 72-win Bulls, this was always my favorite go-to. They lost back-to-back games. They lost to the Denver Nuggets and Toronto Raptors. The Denver Nuggets were a mediocre team, and the Toronto Raptors were terrible that season, or flipped. So I always bring that up because it's like when you freak out about a couple of games, it's like you should keep that in mind. The Warriors in 2016, interestingly enough, never lost a back-to-back game, but did lose to the Denver Nuggets. So it does happen. They did lose to some mediocre teams that season as well. So, yeah, you don't want to overreact to a great team not playing well for a couple of games. It happens. And then, injuries explain a lot of it. And so just to cap off the Rockets, all I'll say is, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. It's hard to know. On this team, the obvious answer is they were outperforming their SRS, and they've had some injuries to all of their stars. And that does matter. I was talking to you pre-show. It's one of my biggest pet peeves in sports where people are like, injuries aren't an excuse. Like, bull. If you know sports, injuries are a huge excuse. I'm a Packers fan. BS Aaron Rodgers missing 7 games doesn't matter to the success of the Packers this season and their odds at a playoff run. So, but so the Rockets are like a 2 thing. It's like slow down, people. They were hot for a bit and they've cooled a little and they've had some injuries. They're not necessarily Warriors killers, but the one nice thing you can hear is there's always a shot in the playoffs. We've seen if you talk about like the hit rate for draft picks, which is this big thing, tank, every show we seem to diss tanking. The hit rate for rookies is horrendous. But if you look at like the hit rate for like an upset in the playoffs, it's far more favorable, especially when you factor in things like injury and, just random stuff happening. So that's the good news. Even with us raining on the parade of the Rockets saying, slow your roll. They haven't overtaken the Warriors yet. The Rockets haven't overtaken the Warriors. There's always a chance in the playoffs. So.
And we do have some credit now for who wrote this. Of course, it was Iceman234, one of the best and most old school commenters going back to the Wages of Wins days. And yeah, he asked if Capella will play at least 30 minutes or more in the playoffs. He only played 25 minutes before. He's also suspicious of Anderson and thinks maybe PJ Tucker could get in there, or, Tarek Black. So anyway, good points, Iceman.
I mean, if he gets Tarek Black, and also, like, we talked this too, like, just to finish that, like Ryan Anderson, we were talking last week about this. He's outperforming what I'd expect based on the last couple of years, and his talents are kind of redundant on that squad. And so I don't even know how that's going to work in the playoffs. And then to your point on like D'Antoni, if D'Antoni falls for it and like plays like Eric Gordon to try and play small ball, and again, at this point, the Warriors were an undersized squad, but the whole reason, by the way, for the Warriors' undersizedness is Steph Curry. Steph Curry is a player we have never seen before in many regards, and one of them is the traditional NBA player, regardless of their position, tends to have long arms, big wingspan. Steph Curry is a Tyrannosaurus Rex. His wingspan is actually below his height by a little bit, I believe. So it's hyperbolic to call him a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but he has short arms. In spite of that, he is the greatest scorer in the history of the NBA. So, but that's
he doesn't weigh 20 tons or whatever a T-Rex weighs.
Yeah, and I mean, like, obviously, Draymond Green is short for a power forward center, but he's got long arms and he's hypermobile. So it's like the idea that the Warriors are a small ballish team, and after they replaced Andrew Bogut, who huge reason they lost the finals, they were up 3-1, is he left injured for the entire. They were up 3-1 when Andrew Bogut was in there. He left the whole series. Draymond Green got suspended and LeBron James went off. Like, it took all three of those things happening for it to be a close win for Cleveland. So very outlierish. But as soon as they replaced Andrew Bogut with Kevin Durant, I believe Ethan Strauss has always had a big anger about this. Like Ethan Sherwood Strauss, who used to write about the Warriors. I hope he still does someplace because he used to do it for ESPN. I hope he does somewhere else. But he has had a thing forever about how Dwight Howard isn't 7 feet and how Kevin Durant isn't 6'9". They're mislisted. As soon as that team got Kevin Durant, who's a 7-footer, they're not a small ball team. Sorry.
Right.
But other teams get, like you're pointing out, other teams get baited into playing small ball against them, and you're never going to win. The only way you win a small ball is if you have better small players. And I'm sorry, there is no team in the NBA that has a better set of small ball players than the Warriors. It's like almost impossible. You have I know we got second one year, but did Draymond Green win Defensive Player of the Year one of those 2 years with Kawhi, or did he only get second?
He finally won it last year, I want to say,
good.
But I don't remember.
You have Defensive Player of the Year Draymond Green. You have two-time MVP Steph Curry. You have MVP and Finals MVP Kevin Durant. You have the second greatest three-point shooter in probably, I think Ray Allen and Reggie Miller are ahead of him, but if he keeps shooting even decently for the rest of his career, Klay Thompson. You have Finals MVP Andre Iguodala. You are not beating that small ball lineup. You would be hard pressed to find a collection of all-star small ball lineup to compete with that. So the fact that teams try and compete and think that strategy is going to trump talent just is amusing as hell.
Yeah, no, that's right. And, we've been talking about this a little bit the last few months, or at least I've been kind of spitballing about it. I like to think of basketball as a zero-sum game. Obviously everyone's written about this, Dave Barry and Dean Oliver and everyone, but yeah, so every play, everyone's competing to try to have a good or bad outcome against the other team. So if you're competing against a team to their strengths, like you're not going to win. Although interestingly, the Rockets are so good at shooting threes that maybe a small ball shootout would be pretty fun against the Warriors. But their smalls aren't as good at being big, so they're just going to get dominated and all that big man stuff, right? And that's how teams actually have succeeded against the Warriors. Like we was talking about earlier. Okay, maybe they lose in three-pointers, but they will just crush the glass so hard and, blocking shots that they can, they can win that part of the game and kind of even things out. So, yeah, you can't beat someone at their strength when they're stronger than you in it normally.
Yeah. I mean, you
over run time anyway.
Roll the dice 100 times, they're probably going to win. That's the one advantage you have in the playoffs is that you only roll the dice 7 times at most.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little Isaiah Thomas. I didn't have a smooth transition. For what it's worth, we are recording
He's
this.
back.
that there was a matchup between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Boston Celtics. Kyrie Irving is doing his best to keep his team out of it. At the half, he is 4 for 9 for shooting with only 8 points.
And Thomas is not playing in this game, is that right? He returned last night, but is now benched.
He returned last night and played very well in limited minutes. I believe he played under 20, but I think he got like 17 points on I think something like 7 for 12 shooting. So that's definitely interesting. There are a lot of points to talk Isaiah Thomas because there has been a long, tumultuous road since he was traded. Apparently, there was a package played for him in Boston. Arturo on Twitter was getting incensed by this because he barely played any time for Boston. And I don't want to talk too much more because I think in the offseason we did a fair bit. But there is a funny point I want to get back to, which is a little sad. And it's actually a dig because we like Isaiah Thomas as a player. And I don't actually even want to dig Isaiah Thomas as much as just this mentality. So Isaiah Thomas, for those that don't know, injured his hip in the playoffs last season in the conference semifinals. He finished out the conference semifinals. They go to the conference finals against Cleveland. I think he plays the first game, then he's shut down for the rest of the season. Additionally, in that time, I believe he lost his sister. And so, very emotional. People are like, man, Isaiah Thomas, though, just the will of a winner. He played through his sister's death. He played through, as a throwback for what it's worth, Joe Dumars in the finals lost his father like 20 years ago. He missed the end of the finals as a result, and then felt bad about it because they lost. But point being, similar situation, right? He lost a family member, but he played through her death. He played through injury. People are like, man, will of a champion. And then I've noticed a couple of people, Dave Barry came back on this. It's like, when you really think about it, it's kind of messed up. When you are willing to basically play through injury to risk your body, when you're able to play through family things, these are things that are glorified typically in sports. I remember a player that's hated in Colorado is Jay Cutler, who finally went to Chicago. And there was a playoffs where he got injured, and the full story is like he went to the trainer's room, he got a shot. They tried to see how he could feel to play, and he was like, I can't play. But then people saw him walking along the sidelines and were like, can you believe this loser in a huge playoff game is sitting on the sidelines instead of trying to win? A real man, a real player tries to win. Steve Nash, when he got injured and was finally done with basketball in Los Angeles, some people saw him playing golf. And it got so bad with the trolling, he had to get on Twitter or Facebook. I believe Facebook. He did a long Facebook post. It was just like, hey, look, I am so beat up, I can't even sit up straight in a normal car. Like, my back is just so messed up. And I can play a little bit of golf. That is not the same as playing a full NBA game. They're not the same. So this really weird mentality of you have to play through everything or else you're not a real player is just effed up. And in many things, like, what's funny is, like, if you look at a normal job, and this pisses me off that they don't actually believe this either, but a lot of corporate jobs are like, if you're sick, don't come to the office. You're going to get everybody else sick. You're probably not going to be at full capacity. You should stay home. That's what, like, the HR docs say. It's what the placards say. But bullshit if people who are sick at the office don't come in sick, because it's also, in a lot of corporate America, considered a sign of weakness to take time off. That's just a weird mentality. It's hyped up to 11 in sports. And just hearkening back to it, yeah, it is one of those where I want to compliment Isaiah Thomas for a lot of things. He did have a really good season last year. We've liked him. He's one of the best short players in NBA history. All of that's fantastic. Really hope him success in Cleveland. That's actually a thing I don't want to be on a side for or popularize or be on the normal thing. I actually, and think about it, it's like, you know what? If a bunch of bad stuff happens to you in the playoffs, yeah, it's the NBA playoffs, but you're human. And it's okay to be human. And it's really weird how we want, as an analytics guy, I'm saying is it's weird how we want players to be kind of machines instead of human, which, yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on all that. And, I was just laughing because just the way you put that is funny, that people really don't understand that taking a couple of hacks on the golf course is different from playing an NBA game. Like, give me a break. Like, that is just unbelievable that people don't understand that. And, you're not supposed to just lay there and do nothing when you have a bad back modern medicine doesn't say that. You are supposed to try to do what you can to stay active, but obviously within reason, not playing an NBA game. So there's nothing wrong with what Steve Nash did, of course. It's pretty ridiculous. I mean, on the one hand, it's paternalism, like we always talk about. People think that, well, this sports team is in my town and it's an old school thing, so we as the people of this town that pay for the tickets can kind of control these people's lives somehow, whereas they would never want that for their own job. It's somehow pro sports is just a different industry from other businesses still to some extent. And I think on the other hand, there's I don't want to go into politics too far. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff going down right now, but I think there is some fatalism to some extent in America now. It's not just people saying, well, this other guy who's not me should be willing to injure themselves. I mean, it's happening everywhere. You know, American life expectancy has been dropping the last few years, and that's never really happened before. And, you know, it's all kinds of problems with the opioid epidemic and all that. But, I think people are kind of just losing hope in general about their health and well-being. So I think that's a part of it, too. I was
kind of like a dark laugh, if that makes sense, because like I realized like the video is like me, I was like smiling. It's like, geez.
It's sort of like if we're getting screwed over by all this stuff, you know, why can't these rich guys also? I think is a part of it, you know.
I think there is a really weird. The United States as a culture is a really interesting one. I'm going to be really curious to see where we are when my son's older. But there is this very weird what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm dropping it. Like, you know, you're
flagellation.
I don't even know.
That's
what that
where
word,
I was going, but maybe you weren't.
Like you're supposed to be responsible for yourself, and so a lot of the I've seen, you know, personal choice, like the opioid epidemic. Even some conservatives that aren't batshit insane, and yes, a lot of them are. Sorry at this point. But, you know, some of them I even respect are like, man, the opioid epidemic, they're adults. They can make their own choice. And you're like, well, they're working a job that doesn't have to give them benefits, that is able to overwork them because they're underwater on their mortgage because of other things. And there's this big pharmaceutical company. Like there's some really messed up stuff when you hear about it, where basically people get turned into drug dealers. Because that's the only job to get. And it's legal, right? Because, you know, they're allowed to push legal painkillers. So it's really messed up, but there's this weird mentality of they need to take self-responsibility for it and ignore the external thing. And like sports, I think to the extreme is that, where you look at players like, why aren't they just, you know, if they don't win a title, it's because they didn't want it enough. If they're out injured, it's because they didn't want it enough. It's just, like I said, hyped up to 11, and it's a really weird American mentality. A lot of it has to do with the individualism that we, you know, really aggrandize. Same like Michael Jordan, right? Michael Jordan is the poster child of the NBA, and the narrative around Michael Jordan is that he was the reason those Bulls won those 6 titles, instead of saying he had some of the best support staff ever in terms of players. He had some of the best coaching staff ever in terms of coaches. He had some of the best front office management ever in terms of that. It all came together to form something great, which is 6 titles. But the way the American mindset works is to say, we got to point to one person. Same is true of like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, right? Yeah. In this country, what we do is when we see success, we go, show me the person that is responsible for that amazing success, instead of saying, if George Lucas for Star Wars, we'll get back to Star Wars, of course, instead of saying, show me the team and set of circumstances that came together to form that amazingness, which is it's a weird mentality, Brian, but not a lot of time for it. What I'm gonna call not the audible, but we have to talk this, so I have to give Brian some shade as a producer.
Oh, good.
Before the show, we have a script, and I went off. We got through most of it. Somehow we managed to talk about the Warriors without talking about how Jordan Bell is the Rookie of the Year per minute and is playing great. Love Jordan Bell. And does back up my point of the best teams just run circles around the worst run teams. I'm going to say the Warriors won this year's NBA draft. That's even with Jason Tatum playing amazing.
How do all other 29 teams or whatever it is pass on a top 5 college guy? Like, I understand he was short, but he was such a good player, and his team made the Final Four. It's not like there's a lack of media exposure.
And I mean,
so much groupthink.
And we're given like a clue too, right? Like, when the Warriors get on the phone with you and say, hey, we want your pick and we want to pick Jordan Bell, you hang up and take Jordan Bell. And I made the very mean comment on Twitter that somebody asked if I was being sarcastic. No, obviously not. I was like, man, if you had Rondo and Jimmy Butler and Jordan Bell, that'd be a really good start for a team right now.
Rondo's leading the league in assists.
Huh. I'd assume per game, right? Not total. I think Harden is total, but yeah.
That's probably true.
But anyway, so we put together the script that we've got through most of. And Brian says right before the show, says, like, wait a minute. I have a link I want to ignore. So it's not in the script, but he stops us to say there's a link he doesn't want to put on the script, which is a very weird producer line. But it piqued my interest so much that we have to talk it. I've decided.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was on here, but okay. Yeah, we'll talk it.
It's the Washington Post. You said there was a Washington Post article that managed to push all of your buttons. So I definitely want to hear this. Washington Post, for the most part, I normally tend to like. So I'm curious on this.
Yeah, they're doing some pretty good political reporting lately, and of course, they've been around for whatever, 100-something years. But yeah, so this is a sports article. So the title is Traditional Big Men Nearly Extinct in the NBA, Nevertheless Packed the 2018 Draft Class. So the second part, I'll agree with them on. I was actually looking at this the other day. There are some great big men in college right now, and they kind of touch on this briefly in the article. You know, some of these guys can do some of the newer big man stuff like handle the ball and shoot from the outside. Some of them can't. And I guess they're just like, well, they're good in college, so we'll figure it out. And there's some great players. There's others they don't even mention, like a guy that Andrew and I were talking about last year, Jock Landale. He's back with St. Mary's College just down the street from me, having another dominant wins per Duke season. So here's the line that really got me in this article, though. And with defenses happy to hack the likes of DeAndre Jordan and Andre Drummond, both traditional on-the-block bigs, the nature of power forwards and centers is entirely different from even 5 years ago when the plodding Roy Hibbert led the Indiana Pacers to a division crown. Now, DeAndre Jordan and Andre Drummond are maybe like the top two like candidates for MVP right now. Like, they're playing amazing. Jordan, okay, maybe not as much. Like, maybe Capella's in there, but
I like that DeAndre Jordan is playing really well without Chris Paul.
He's playing great. Well, go ahead. I'll get back to it later, though. Go ahead.
What I was gonna love is like the hack point. Hack-a-Shaq was a thing 20 years ago when Shaq was in the league, and the answer is if I can shoot 60% effective field goal from the field, then hack away. And even Andre Drummond, who was like at 40%, we've always said his numbers were great. So it's really funny. You know, the narratives, one of our favorite around here is the treadmill of mediocrity, which flies in the face of every single bit of study you can do on the NBA draft. Says the treadmill of mediocrity. If you look at team success, this was in Basketball on Paper, which is probably the first mainstream book released on basketball analytics. All of the published like academic research from Dave Barry, like, the treadmill of mediocrity is bullshit, but it caught on and everybody loves it. Hack-a-Shaq was a failing strategy against Shaquille O'Neal, and even against Andre Drummond. That applies to like 3 minutes of game time.
So check it out, Dre. I got to interrupt. So you remember we were talking a little bit earlier about the Timberwolves, and you said, man, Jimmy Butler and Karl Anthony Towns, they're probably going to have to get out of there. They're not going to put up with Andrew Wiggins, right? Well, we had a user on the RNBA subreddit today, RPDC01, posted a very interesting stat that ties all this together, which is Andre Drummond, 62.6%, is shooting better on free throws than Andrew Wiggins, 62.5% for this season. So there you go. Drummond's having a great year, and not even his free throws are dragging him down, at least if you want to compare him to everyone's savior, Andrew Wiggins. So,
and I mean, if you look at the NBA right now, Clint Capella, Andre Drummond, DeAndre Jordan, Karl Anthony Towns. I mean, Dwight Howard's still sticking around and playing great. I mean, I think we've talked this before. There is this odd hate, and actually, I had someone that I thought was being joking in my comments because I think I said a while ago something akin to, it's okay if you don't have LeBron James as your number one all-time basketball player, but the only players that are acceptable in front of him are Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Michael Jordan. For what it's worth, the reason I picked those two, because I had a bunch of people coming back like, what about Magic Johnson? What about this? The reason those two win. So Michael Jordan, 6 finals MVPs in the modern NBA. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all-time MVP record, 6 MVPs, also had 5 titles. So the point being, and this is going to annoy some people, but yes, I do this too. I'm saying if you're going to go by both advanced analytics and conventional wisdom, the only 2 players that have a case when you put those 2 things together are Michael Jordan and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. If you look at just advanced analytics, right, obviously adding longevity, LeBron James tears everybody away. Obviously, like the best all time was that 11 seasons of Magic Johnson, but he just didn't last as long. So that's just the point. So when I was saying that, so I completely lost my train of thought from where we we're going. Oh yeah, so going back to like best in the league, traditional big man. Help me get back on track, Brian.
So I just brought it up right now because I was tempering my enthusiasm a little bit, but I shouldn't have. Drummond and Jordan are 1-2 in wins produced at 9.4 and 9.3. LeBron James, who's third at this point, we're January 3rd, 2018 right now, he's only 8.8. So those 2 guys are starting to put some distance, on Harden and Capella as well, who are also up there. So, yeah, I mean, they're doing it with rebounding, and DeAndre Jordan blocks shots, and Drummond is starting to pass a little bit more this season. So they do other stuff too. And, of course, they're very efficient around the rim as well. So rebounding is just really important. And, articles like this Washington Post article tend to forget about that.
But what I was going to say is I had some people that pushed back against Kareem because they were just like, well, it's not fair. He's super tall. Like, you can't put him on that list because being super tall is just a cheat code. I think that's always been the case in the NBA. And so people champ at the bit, I think is what it's actually said, champ at the bit to go against anything that says bigs aren't as important anymore. Now the NBA has changed so that a small player, that small players that shoot threes are the most important things, ignoring the fact, right, that even when the Warriors have won a title, they have always had a super talented 7-footer on the team, right? The Rockets doing as well as they are, as you pointed out, the huge part, and the funny thing about this was Clint Capella being able to get Dwight. Dwight Howard's still great, but Dwight Howard's diminishing. But he's a star, so he's going to want the starting role. Putting Clint Capella in the starting role in front of Dwight Howard was an upgrade. So, like, all of these teams that have done great have done so with great bigs. LeBron James annoys the hell out of me. LeBron James would have been a center back in the day, as we pointed out. So it's really weird that people go like, the NBA has changed. There's no place for big men anymore, and you just look around and you go, that every team that has been successful has had a big man or LeBron James.
And to your LeBron example, LeBron's recent title run, all these great teams have had a lot of great big men other than LeBron. Like Tristan Thompson's been great. He's hurt right now. Obviously, Kevin Love is great. Even Anderson Varejao back in the day, and of course on the Heat, there's tons of good ones too.
Kevin Love is the stretch for, because that's the argument. And then my easy counter, I love this guy, Giannis Antetokounmpo, does not shoot from outside. So it's kind of like people want to say the traditional big that just rebounds and shoots from up close is dead. That's not true according to the numbers. And it's very cherry picky, right? Because you're basically, if you just focus on the team that is winning titles and then miss doing it, because you're a Warriors fan and you realize that all these people are like, the Warriors are small ball, they don't have a traditional big. It's like, well, they had Andrew Bogut when they won and he was really important. And now they have Kevin Durant and he's really good. It's just like, it's really weird.
But Julian McGee have been great too in limited minutes. Like they have all kinds of great big men.
It's just really annoying for people to it'd be like if you're focusing on baseball as an example, like to just, this seems to happen, right? Oscillating between like, you need great hitting to win, you need great pitching to win. If you just focus on the team that wins the title, you're going to come up with stupid takes like this. And that's our take. We love you, Washington Post, but that's a
so
weird...
they did put some numbers in here, and I want to talk about this briefly. A couple of charts. So one is titled, What Happened to the Block? And it just shows that the NBA leaders in blocks per game has gone down. So first of all, that doesn't mean a lot to me because, I mean, who knows? Maybe one era just had better individual shot blockers than others. I'd be interested in looking at, team blocks, obviously.
Well, there's an easy answer too, by the way, which is fine to this point, which is three ball has become very important.
Different offensive styles.
And I really freaking love the Rockets. They're shooting above 50. They got to keep. They're doing so well that there's no way they don't do it for the season. But it's early enough that I'm not gonna make it 100% claim. They're shooting over half of their shots from three, which is amazing, and they're shooting 36.5%. Dear God, I hope they finish the season out. They'll be the first team to do it. But the point there being, you're much less likely to block a three, and the rate of threes has gone up.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about that later, because that's something really interesting to me, which is that the Rockets have had much better shot selection than the Warriors. So I do want to look into that more. But anyway, the point of bringing this up, this chart as evidence that blocks don't matter as much, therefore big men are as important. Well, the aforementioned best team in the league this year so far, the Warriors, are also dominating in blocks, which is, again, something I want to get into the future. They are just having a block party, as announcers like to say. So now they've got another chart here about pace. And, the pace has gone up since, the early 2000s. But the pace has been really higher in the past as well. So this doesn't mean a whole lot to me. And you can run with big men. Big men are great at running. So I don't like this chart either.
Thank you for letting me talk about this, too. I wrote an article about this, one of my last pieces at Wages of Wins, where I said what happened to all the possessions. One annoying thing about the past, and I'll let this tie into my article you have on the script. We'll hit everything on the script, and we can go. We didn't hit the Kyrie Irving trade drama stuff. Maybe we'll hit that next week.
I don't want to talk about that, really.
And we didn't get around to talking about media and stuff, which is a whole show on its own. So we'll leave. For those of you that didn't do your Christmas homework, it's 2 shows ago, we said read up on the G League getting onto Twitch, on Vince McMahon getting into football, on modern WWE streaming. For those of you that didn't look up any of those things, you got another week or two if we do Star Wars next week to do it. So you got an extension on your paper. It may go on indefinitely. Enjoy. But just the looking at old eras as if they're better. Old teams used to be sloppy. When you talk about a faster rate of play, when they talk pace is, essentially how many possessions you get per 48 minutes. The reason a lot of old teams used to have a faster pace is they just turn the ball over and missed. So, I mean, basically you used to have, I've used this comparison before, I'm sure. And if not, I get to use it for the first time. If you've ever watched a super, maybe kindergartners play soccer, and they just all chase the ball, and then one of them misses and they all chase the ball and it just goes back. It's the cluster of kids running back and forth. You can look at the stats for historical NBA, and that was it. They were turning the ball over a ton. They were missing a ton of shots. They weren't grabbing the defensive board, means they weren't boxing out. So when people are talking pace, what's happened is the modern NBA, they've just gotten better at their job, right? They make more shots. They don't turn the ball over as much. They box out and get defensive rebounds. And if you do all of those things, you're going to decrease the pace of the NBA. It doesn't mean the league has necessarily gotten shorter or less sharp, but I mean, you're Warriors, right? You can watch them run ragged and do lots of amazing things. Obviously, D'Antoni, the founder of the 7 seconds or less Suns, obviously he has some fast offenses on the Rockets. Pace doesn't mean running the ball really quickly. I mean, it can mean that, right? Pace doesn't necessarily mean that. Pace can literally just mean changing possessions lots of times in a game, and that could happen if you just play sloppy and bad basketball, which used to be the case. Yeah, and either in your article about pace, Dre, or somewhere else that I saw, I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a graph that's just year versus league O rating, and the league O rating is going up and up and up over the years. Offense is just getting better. Well, actually, and I've mentioned this before, it's one of those charts that I wish I'm not going to pull it out because we're close to time. We've been going over an hour. Yep. Dean Oliver had that in Basketball on Paper, which was updated to 2006. So I definitely like to see that chart updated. And then one thing he did that was nice on that chart is he annotated rule changes. So I'd love someone who's more familiar with the rules and stuff to say that. But yeah, modern NBA teams are getting much better at shooting the ball, much better at making offensive sets. And so all of these narratives of big men are becoming extinct and whatever, it's the other thing that bugs me about that is when you look at the crop of players that dictate success in the NBA, it's always 10 to 20 players in any given season. It's always the cream of the crop, right? And I think it's just noise, right? If you have 6 really good big men versus 4, that's enough to swing things in the favor. And then the last part, and this is like, I wrote an article on Charles Barkley, and I just want to talk about this, where like there's so many old players that want to feed the narrative that back in my day we were better, back in my day we did things right. I've seen the stupid narrative of bigs need to go to college to learn how to play the right way. Dwight Howard doesn't know how to play correctly, et cetera, et cetera. That's always bugged me. And it's just so freaking popular to say kids these days don't know how to play the game right. It's the stupid millennial trope, and it just does not line up with reality. And even the modern NBA says there are a ton of super talented, great bigs. Just most of them aren't on contenders right now. And that's not enough to say, I'm certain that Cleveland would, in a second, trade any player but Kevin Love and LeBron James for Andre Drummond or DeAndre Jordan, maybe even Clint Capella.
Yeah, and I think it's really a yay points thing as well. And by that, I mean, we are having a renaissance of big men, and there's so many good ones. We were just talking all about them. Rudy Gobert is another who probably should have been the MVP last year. List goes on and on. Like you said, Howard is doing well. I think it's just that they're dominating through defense and passing and things that are not just shooting a lot from isolation in the post like they used to. And people are just biased against that. I mean, like we were talking about earlier, I think when people are talking about how good players are, they just mean how skilled. They don't really care how productive. And scoring points is a skillful thing to do.
And it's also like you mentioned blocks. One interesting thing I noted on blocks is like the average team gets 4 to 5 blocks a game. That is so few, it's hard to notice. So the reason points dominate is it is so easy to notice a player that, a good blocker blocks 2 times per game as opposed to 1. And that's a 48-minute game. So you watch the entire game, you might not even remember the block. And if their block doesn't end up on SportsCenter, you forget it. Whereas if Kobe Bryant takes 20 shots and makes 5 impressive-looking ones without 20 shots isn't hard to do. Even if those are the only 5 he makes, you probably remember one of those 2 shots. So a lot of these are just classic biases that we're very aware people have. I'll use that to just tie. I'm just going to do my shout out, Brian, if that's okay.
Go for it.
So I'll lead us into shout outs at that point. Dave Barry wrote a fantastic article over at Forbes about a very interesting phenomenon, which is kind of a shame in football, as if football doesn't have enough problems with race this season. Just noticing, and by the way, I'm going to show my football ignorance. The Detroit Lions head coach was fired after leading the team to a 9-7 record, which is a winning record, and in certain conferences, which not the NFC, AFC, or the way around. Which one? I don't know. One of the
Detroit Lions are NFC.
Okay, so the AFC had teams with that record go to the wild card spot. But
I see.
Because the Detroit Lions are on the NFC, it's the East versus West point of basketball. They did not make the playoffs, and their head coach was fired. And Dave Barry noted that African-American coaches in the NFL are much more likely to be fired for winning records, despite the fact that it is a very, very small sample of people that have been fired. It's just kind of one of those things that should make you think twice and say, and then he brings up, I'm going to mispronounce it, the Rooney Rule.
Yeah, that's right.
So the NFL has a rule in place that says if you're going to interview for a new head coach, you have to what's the full thing? Making sure you look at least, I believe, one African American. Is that right, or what's the full?
I think that's right, but yeah, it's Art Rooney and the Rooney family have owned the Pittsburgh Steelers for a long time. They're like it's an old school, family-run team.
It's minority candidates for head coaching and senior football operation jobs.
Yeah.
Now, one thing Dave notes is that there's no Rooney Rule for firing, so there's no rule that says, hey, think about this ahead of time. And all he was saying, because I want to make sure, because I know this is always a touchy subject, and the amount of it's very interesting how quickly people are to jump to say something has nothing to do with race, which I don't think is the case here. It's just interesting to note how frequently that has happened and how lopsided, it's just noticing it's like our Embiid point. Embiid has a lot of turnovers, and we're like, that's kind of problematic. If he doesn't get that under control, that's going to be a problem going forward. Same point here. We're kind of going, that's a little problematic. So I'm just giving a shout out there. But then one of the things Dave Barry brings up in that is just one thing that we love on the show around here. We always talk behavioral psychology. Just it's very hard to know your implicit biases, which is why it's important to kind of have numbers to check, things to check, questions to make sure you ask yourself. And so to the point on like bigs and stuff like you were saying, it's just like if you don't ask the wrong questions, you might get influenced by bad biases. And Dave Barry has a fantastic article about how maybe NFL front offices, the league that got freaked out that a black person politely didn't want to stand for the anthem to protest police brutality, that league might have some issues with race. And just something to think about. So that's my shout out. Check out Forbes.com/sites/David Barry for that article and all this other great stuff. He wrote another good. He didn't take a break like we did, Brian. So he wrote some good articles on like the WNBA during Christmas break as well. So make sure you check that out if you haven't. If you've got any shout outs, Brian, I'll let you get to that, and then that will be our show.
No, not really. Just to you guys. Excited to start 2018. I guess to the Rooney Rule as well. It's been around for a while now, and I want to say it's been pretty successful. And basically the idea is it just gets more people known and their names out there. So, even if these guys have been getting interviewed to be the token, it has kind of led to them getting jobs down the road, even if it wasn't that job. So we have seen a lot of great, black coaches rise up in the NFL recently. And, hopefully that'll be a model for different leagues.
Yeah. And do you have no shout outs, or you just
No, that was my shout out to the Rooney Rule and to you, Dre, for an exciting start to the year.
So I mean that's very classic grad school or meeting where you just echo the person in front of you. But I'll give you credit.
That's right.
I'll give a funny grad school story to end this. So in grad school, a lot of what it's doing is reading papers and then discussing them in class. In the age of the internet, a comment we've had is, just how frequently people will comment on an article without reading it. It becomes very obvious in the comment section when someone hasn't read it. So that's grad school. Grad school is you're supposed to read an article in depth, take notes, come into class, discuss them, etc. A lot of succeeding in grad school is writing papers and then discussing. It's a lot of reading and writing and discussing things. I can't believe I made it through my master's. I have no intention of ever going for a doctorate. But there was one day in class where I normally talk a lot. Shocker, I know. In grad school about papers. There's one day I didn't read a paper and just, I did exactly what you did a few times. I just mimicked someone behind. But a classmate of mine actually noticed and said, hey, you didn't talk as much as you normally do during the paper. And I said, yeah, actually, I got busy. I didn't read it. And he loudly repeated and said, you didn't read it? And with the teacher in the class. So I got found out for doing what you did. But it is an effective strategy, usually, if your friends don't sell you out. So anyway. Tangents on tangents on tangents, Brian. That's this week's show, but it's just a rep game, getting our reps back. We'll be back either with Star Wars or NBA next week. It's been the Boxscore Geeks show. If you want us not through the website, we are at boxscoregeeks.com. You can find us on Stitcher and iTunes, the Boxscore Geeks show. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. I think you told me because they're embracing sports, we actually have sports tags, so maybe more of you found us that way. And then you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter at Nerd Numbers, if you haven't heard Nerd Numbers enough at this point. Co-host and produced by Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. And then always with us in spirit, if not with us in corporeal form, NBA Geek Patrick Minton. That's been our show, and we'll see you next time.